So welcome to section 3 of this presentation, where we're hopefully going to go into some practical tools that you might use in order to help your child make decisions about how they spend their energy, try and pace themselves better, spot patterns, and overall just get that good baseline and work out how to kind of make a plan of how they're going to improve the amount of activity they're able to do just now, and hopefully their energy levels as well. One of the useful tools that I've come across is a decision matrix tool. I'm sure it has other names as well, but it's very useful when it comes to finding what priorities are for your children and where they should be directing their energy, and also in considering what activities are restful for your child. You can look at it under different categories if that's useful. So you could do one of these for school subjects, one for leisure, one for hobbies, one for kind of activities of daily living. You could also do one of these for people you spend time with, because some people require more energy of young people than others, and some young people they consider them more valuable to spend time with than others. Using symbols, drawings or words depending on the child is perfectly fine and appropriate. Again, it's what works for your child. It can be really useful to use this kind of matrix to look at, well, what's the next step? So perhaps you have got your child to the stage that they're coping with a baseline, and you've started that slow gradual increase of activities back into their daily lives and their weekly lives. And in terms of thinking, well, what activity will we introduce next? What will we try and change next? Sometimes revisiting this matrix can make it much easier to pick what activity you're going to choose. Also, you can use these to compare over time to get an idea of whether an activity is provoking more or less fatigue than it used to. So I will run you through this example that I've taken just considering hobbies that a child might be doing out with school. I've tried to give a reasonable range, and what we'll do is talk through why these are placed where they are and what you're going to do with that information. So if we start with rugby, so this child has been playing rugby in a club, and they obviously find it takes a huge amount of energy. There's a lot of running about. It's a very competitive club, and it's not something they particularly enjoy. They would be quite happy not to do it anymore, and rugby is not a sport that you as a family particularly value. So rugby goes far left because it's a low value activity for yourself and your young person, and a really high energy activity because it's taking a lot of energy out of them that they then don't have for anything else. So anything that falls in this kind of red zone in the top left corner of the slide with high energy and low value, as we said earlier, are really useful as kind of first things just to stop or reduce if you're struggling to get your child's energy kind of on track. So let's think about basketball, which is over to the right. So basketball in this case is an activity that this child has said they value, they like, they enjoy it, but it does take high energy for them. So what you would do with activities that are really high value and also high energy is consider adapting these to make them lower energy so that they could fall further down towards the yellow of the energy bar there. And you would want to consider adapting them to a level until it would be sustainable for them to manage without, again, that boom and bust crash that we've talked about so much already. You can see cooking is in there as a high value activity, but it uses less energy than basketball. So perhaps if you were looking for something to introduce back into your child's hobbies because they were coping with their current level, then you would probably go in to look at reintroducing cooking earlier than basketball, just in terms of prioritisation. Down in the kind of bottom half of the graph where there's low energy activities, they are activities that are often considered kind of restful activities. And we haven't really touched that much on the importance of finding restful activities that your child enjoys. So we spoke about the importance of rest, but rest can obviously mean sitting doing nothing, but children are notoriously not great at sitting doing nothing. So often restful activities for children could be things like Lego or art or colouring or playing in a sandpit, or sometimes having a bath or having a conversation with a parent. Those are activities which are really low energy, so they would be considered rest. And as such, anything that is rest, we have said already, should be kind of prioritised as part of their overall day. So in this scenario here, we have the young lad listening to music. So he clearly loves listening to music. It's a really high value activity, and it's as low energy as I could get it without overlapping the post-it note. So that is an activity that you would want to really prioritise in your child's day and life, because in kind of managing fatigue in a young person, obviously you don't want them just to be doing nothing and being bored all the time. So having a range of activities which are high value and low energy is really good. And you might even want to have a selection of these for children or young people, particularly if you have a young person who struggles when they have nothing to do, and their tendency is to opt towards really high energy activities which you know will tire them out. So a young person with ADHD, for example, you might want to have some activities ready for them, or a box that they can choose from of things that you know don't drain their energy, but that they really value, and keep them occupied. So in this scenario here, you're really going to prioritise the music listening, and then you've got Lego and art, and you can see from the graph that Lego is higher value to the child, and they're both using about the same energy. So because that Lego brick is closer to the prioritise post-it there, when you were reintroducing activities again, you probably would go in for Lego earlier than art. Obviously this is a bit of a simplistic model. Hopefully it gives you a bit of an idea perhaps where to start. If you are looking for activities that are restful for your child, and you found things like the jigsaw, which is over in the far left corner, which yes are very restful but they're really low value to your child, then we would say that they're activities that you potentially would consider replacing with something that is higher value to them. So this is a very concrete way of looking at activities, and it can be really useful for planning. As I say, these tools sometimes work very good for some people and not for others. So have a kind of look, maybe try and do one for yourself and your own activities and see if you find it useful. And as I say, it can be used to kind of revisit it over time to look at increasing how many activities a child is doing, or how often they're doing them, or how much of it they're doing in the week. So say we are revisiting this decision matrix 3 months down the line, you might see that basketball they have been doing, and it has dropped from a kind of high energy level down to a medium energy level activity for that child, and that would obviously let you see progress, and it would be useful to maybe think about, well, is it now the right time to increase the amount of basketball they're doing to get back to their full session, so say if they've only been in half sessions. So that's the decision matrix tool. So one of the tools that I find most useful in helping young people with kind of persistent fatigue is this activity rest and sleep diary. Now there are various versions of this on the internet. This version comes from the Royal United Hospital in Bath, who have a specialist centre for chronic fatigue in young people, and they have loads of resources on their website that might be useful to you. The links to all these resources are at the end of the presentation, as I've said before. So the idea with this activity rest and sleep diary is really using it as a way of recording where your child is spending their energy, as we've already said, and it can be really handy for spotting patterns between weeks or between weeks and weekend days. And I think the coloured visual of it is often really useful if you're not quite sure where to start and trying to help your child pace their week a little bit better. So the way we would encourage young people to fill in this activity rest diary is to literally colour in the boxes for the early segments in their week in either red, amber or green or blue, depending on whether they're doing an activity that they feel is high energy, low energy, rest or chill out time, or sleep. Now, a kind of key point we mentioned already, everybody sees colour differently, and what is high energy for one person will be different to another young person. But to give you a little bit of an idea of roughly where we would gauge those kind of things, high energy activities physically would be things that involve kind of moderate to intense exercise, so being out of breath, being sweaty. Low energy would be perhaps walking, activities that you can kind of carry on while you're still talking. And obviously rest chill out time is probably not doing any walking at all. In terms of more kind of cognitive tasks, a high energy activity might be kind of reading a book with a quite complicated plot, or that you have to hold lots of characters in your head. Low energy activity might be reading a book that you've read before, or that has a really straightforward plot, or that's easier than your reading level. And rest chill out time might mean just flicking through a magazine, looking at the pictures. In terms of young people at school, the amount of energy that they assign to different subjects might vary, and that might depend on how easy or difficult they find the subject, or also on how noisy the environment of the class is, who else I suppose is in the class to help them. So it is very much their perception of how much energy whatever the activity is using up. I should also say, just to be clear, although this uses kind of traffic light colours for high, low or high, low and rest activities, it doesn't mean that red activities should be stopped. If a young person stopped all the red activities, they probably wouldn't be doing much learning. They certainly wouldn't be doing any exercise that's enough to benefit their physical fitness, and they probably would be missing out on a lot of things that are important to them, and kind of in keeping with what they want to be achieving and doing in their lives. So red does not mean stop. Red just means that it takes a lot of energy. So when a young person has filled this in, they will get a kind of colour-coded pattern, and I'm going to fill one in for you and come back in the next slide and we can have a chat through what that means with a real example in front of us, because I think that will be more useful. So this is an example of a completed activity rest and sleep diary. Now this is just one that I've mocked up for this video, however I would say it is fairly typical of a lot of these rest and sleep diaries that I see from young people who have persistent fatigue that is impacting on their function, or who have a diagnosis with of chronic fatigue syndrome. So what you ideally are looking for is a spread of high energy activities with lower energy activities and rest chill out time in between. When you, at first glance, you can see fairly clearly that this child's sleep pattern is shifting at the weekends. So they are going to bed later Friday night, Saturday night, and lying in Saturday, Sunday, as many young people do, and therefore are likely to find it much more difficult on Monday and Tuesday, and that perhaps is reflected by the fact that there is far more high energy expenditure in the early part of the week than there is in the end of the week. The other thing that would instantly jump out at me from this is that this young person has not very much rest and chill out time in their Monday to Thursdays in either week. and then they're spending most of their Saturdays and Sundays kind of relaxing and chilling, and I would be slightly suspicious that's because they have burned out all their energy through the week and are having to recover from that crash at the weekend. Now, looking at this activity diary, if this is the kind of pattern that you're seeing, this is generally not likely to be sustainable for the longer term in a young person with persistent fatigue. The kind of boom and bust cycle is fairly obvious in terms of Monday to Friday looking different to Saturday, Sunday, and over time you might expect to see some of the things in the diary that are currently amber. So looking at the timings of those, that's like getting ready for school, perhaps the journey to school and lunch break. Some of the other ambers might be easier subjects at school for them, so perhaps watching film and media studies, or just the subject they find really easy. Over time, if this energy expenditure continued, I would expect to see some of those amber or yellow squares turning red as things became more difficult for this young person. They had less energy to do things that even previously were easier for them. So this really is a pattern of activity, rest and sleep diary that we probably would want to make some changes to. And again, if a young person is completing one of these diaries and there's lots and lots of red, but they aren't actually needing to recover at the weekends, sometimes there is a conversation to be had about, well, what does high energy mean to them versus what does a low energy activity look like. And sometimes young people, or adults actually, when I've done this with them, have just considered everything that is work or skill as red, and that's not actually the case. So in an average school day, a pupil who doesn't struggle with significant fatigue should be able to go about bits of their school day, certainly, and not require huge high levels of energy from them. So it should look much more a mixture of red and amber than these big blocks, which shows that they're spending loads of energy all at once and are likely probably struggling quite a lot to maintain their current levels of function. So this would suggest to me that this child needs to implement some pacing strategies. So looking at trying to get little bits of rest in their weekdays, I would be suggesting that you would have a look at, well, how can we get some chill out time into their school day? Could they go off somewhere at break? Could they leave a class 5 minutes early? Could they perhaps get out of school Monday to Thursday before the rush, just to save a wee 15 minutes of energy? I would be having a little think about, are there any ways that their morning routine between 7 and 8 could be made less high energy for them? Could they sit down to get themselves dressed instead of standing up? Could they switch their shower to the evening when currently they have rest chill out time? So could they move that high energy requirement of getting ready, or move some of that to the evening to again spread that out a little bit? Mostly this is just a useful tool for identifying patterns, and once you've identified patterns, trying to think of what you can change. And sometimes this is quite useful done in conjunction with someone else. And again, there are various sources of support for that that you'll find links to at the end of the video. What I'm going to do now is flip over and show you an activity diary of a young person, perhaps the same young person who has gone through the process of pacing themselves, who has perhaps put some rests into their week, and we'll see what impact that has on their activity diary in just a minute or two. So this slide here aims to illustrate what this same young person's activity diary might look like once they've implemented some kind of pacing strategies. Instantly you can spot that their sleep-wake pattern is a little bit more consistent between the week and the weekday. Still having a little bit of a lie-in at the weekends, but I think that's okay for all of us. But their lie-in is no more than 1 to 2 hours longer than their usual midweek waking time. You can see that some of those big chunks of red high energy activities have been broken up a little bit in that first week, so they've added in a few more rests. Just to talk you through what some of those changes might have looked like for this young person, you will see that there's a period of time between 8 and 9 o'clock every morning on a weekday that has now turned green. Compared to the previous slide, that's perhaps because they have made the decision to get a lift to school instead of walking to school, which has given them the ability to have a bit of a rest and a chill in the car, perhaps with their parent, before they get to school, to conserve some of that energy. You'll also see that what previously every morning had a red bar first thing in the morning when they were getting up and showered and dressed, they have decided to switch their shower to the evenings every alternate night, which again just spreads out their high energy activities a little bit more. Doesn't expend as much of their energy before they even started on the school day. You'll see that there by and large are still blocks of red high energy activities for a couple of hours during every school day. And if this young person is experiencing persistent fatigue, that's kind of to be expected. Ideally you wouldn't want to see more than 2-hour blocks with a young person that is struggling to manage their current activity levels, because that's unlikely to be a stable baseline. So you can see in that first week there are some afternoons that there is no rest for this young person. So if you look at Wednesday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, they have no rest between 8 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock. And while this is a lot better than the previous slide, if I was looking at this activity diary with this young person, I would be saying it's a huge amount of improvement. Last time you can see that the pacing strategies are working, but perhaps because we're seeing that you are only doing high energy and medium energy activities on Wednesday, Thursday, I see that you are having to have a significant rest on a Friday, and you're still having more rest time on a Saturday and a Sunday than necessarily you want to have, because you've told me you want to get back to your weekend hobbies. So at that stage, what I would suggest with the young person is implementing some rest periods in amongst their afternoon school classes. And you can see those being put in place between the first week in the activity diary and the second week in the activity diary, and the changes that you would expect to see from that kind of shift. So putting in those breaks midway through their afternoons has by and large led to them being able to have a little bit more capacity at the weekends to rejoin perhaps weekend activities that they hadn't managed to be doing for a while. So you'll see on the Sunday they have managed to do a period of low energy and then a break and then a high energy activity, and I was thinking of that perhaps as being some kind of Sunday like a drama club or perhaps a sports club that they've managed to get back to. They're potentially doing a couple of hours just watching and catching up with their teammates or whatever, having a bit of a proper rest while maybe the other members of the team do a high energy activity, and then they're joining in for a few hours, a fairly high intense activity for them, but knowing that they are then going home and have a period to rest and chill out to recover from that before on the Sunday evening you can see a red block that kind of represents their shower, which still is they are finding a kind of higher energy activity for them. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea how you could use this activity diary with your young person. I would say it makes a lot more sense just to try it, and the patterns are fairly easy to spot over time. And I would say if you are filling in activity diaries and seeing patterns and not quite sure what to do with them, Again, you can always seek advice from any of the professionals on Just Ask or school or any other adult to have a think about what you could potentially change. Where rest periods need to put into the school day, that obviously will be done in discussion with your school. Where you're looking at rest periods to go into home activities, I would suggest thinking about could you use a different location in their house to get a bit more of a break, or speaking to sports coaches or whatever about them sitting out of particular parts of a session. It usually takes a bit of creative thinking, but if you keep the kind of end goal in mind, which is to try and get a activity diary which almost looks as messy as possible. So where there are large blocks of red and then huge blocks of green, that's not the sign of a healthy energy expenditure, because that's not what a normal energy expenditure would look like. So the messier the activity diary often, in some ways the healthier the energy expenditure is. I would highly recommend you go away and try this, and maybe even try it on yourself and see how you feel your week is, see if there's any patterns in activities, see what things you would consider to consume lots of your energy and what activities you don't, and see if you spot any patterns. With your young person at home, I highly recommend getting them to try this and seeing what information you can gather from it. As I say, these are tools which work for some people and don't work for others, so if you find it useful, that's brilliant. If not, perhaps have a think about what other tools you could use that might be of use to you. So just a quick summary of some other tools that you might come across that your child or young person might find useful. There are plenty of goal setting sheets in various different forms available on the internet for free download. These can kind of help with prioritising where to go next in terms of increasing your child's activity levels once they've got a consistent baseline. If they're trying to work out what activities that they're currently doing they want to do more of, or perhaps which of their former activities they want to reintroduce, having a goal setting sheet to look at the bigger picture can often be really helpful for them in that. There are also plenty of activity trackers on phones, or the use of paper activity trackers or diaries that young folk can use to record the impact of what activities they're doing on their fatigue and help them to spot those patterns. The use of kind of notifications on phones or apps to remind them of their kind of rest periods. Again, it's quite useful if the young person has kind of ownership over their pacing, rather than it being something that you as the parent are having to constantly remind them of. It'll tend to be more effective, and they're more likely to carry on doing it when you're not directly with them, if they have kind of ownership over that, obviously depending on their age and stage of development. Sometimes step counters can be useful if you're struggling to spot patterns where they seem more fatigued one day than the other. Then step counters can sometimes point out where actually they're doing far more physical travelling in one day than another, particularly if they're going from one side of a high school to the other. Finally, the most valuable tool you really have at your disposal is your knowledge of your child and your observation skills. So spotting those kind of patterns of boom and bust and maybe gently suggesting ways to interrupt them. And also that ability that you have with your child to kind of show them where they're making improvements and to reassure them when there are perhaps bumps in the road or relapses, that this doesn't mean that their fatigue will return back to the levels it initially was, just to maintain their kind of motivation to keep going with this pacing for as long as they need it, because it can take a little bit of time for young people to return to the levels of activity that they want to be doing. Check out the resources slides at the end of this presentation, and I hope to see some of you at the Q&A session that's coming up, and so write your questions down for that, and it would be really useful if you've got any feedback on what parts of this have been most useful, what parts of it you don't feel were necessary. Hope you find this resource useful, and I'll hopefully see as many of you at the Q&A as I can. Thanks, bye for now.